All right, flippers, snorkels, and wetsuits. I think we're all set for architecture, coffee, and ink. Hello, this is Hollywood C, and you're listening to Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, a podcast dedicated to introducing concepts, detailing out designs, and tackling the architecture you might not realize the meaning behind. I'm your hostess, and I'm here today to start introducing you to the designs that make you wonder why. So I ask you to brew your coffee, grab your sketchbook and pen, and let's begin. Welcome to the bonus episode. This is actually a rather somber weekend for me. I am aware that the majority of my listeners will probably not be aware, but in my region of America, there was actually a bunch of tornadoes. And while my family and I are all okay, that is not true for everyone who lives around us, and really not true for those who live in Kentucky north of us. So I ask that today you send a kind thought, good karma, prayer, positive vibe, well wishes, whatever, to those who are/were affected this weekend. I would also ask you to take a moment and make sure that you and your family are aware of the natural disasters that could happen in your region, wherever you live. And have a safe place, plan of action, etc., an emergency kit, even if it's just candles and or a torch or flashlight available. I would also encourage you to make sure you perform seasonal checks on your plants, particularly your trees or anything that is going to be large enough to make an impact when it falls. While fungus or tree rot wasn't what caused the trees to fall on houses where I am, making sure you visually inspect your garden yourself every season can help. For new gardeners and even more experienced ones, I recommend keeping a log and documenting any new boreholes, etc. If you also have children, it can actually be a great afternoon activity one day to get them to help you explore and document. Give them an instant camera or a disposable and let them help create a field guide. And when possible, please make sure you know about all of the resources available in your community. Relief funds, volunteer crews, etc., and donate if possible and if you feel called to. After plenty of research, you know exactly where your money is going and why. Now again to the disclaimer, I am just a grad student, so please use any advice at your own discretion. I am not responsible for any children that would become equally as plant obsessed as I am. So this episode actually comes at winter break for me. And I say that now because I'm hoping I'll edit it. It'll be able to remove it completely. But if you hear meowing or things thumping in the background, there's a particularly ambitious kitten determined to help me with my recording tonight. As I'm not going to be recording in my usual location. Actually, she's quite a bit older than a cat and than a kitten. I just call her kitten all the time. But so as I said last week, I'm going to be doing a series of fun episodes. So this morning, you will have noticed that you are getting the bonus episode I couldn't get out this weekend due to, everything. But this week, there will actually be several episodes released. So another 2 episodes will be coming out Saturday morning at 5 a.m. But having a series of relaxing, fun episodes to finish off the year sounds amazing. And I will actually be asking people for ideas to see what they want to hear about. This episode, Underwater Designs, is actually one of my favorite topics. So when I was young, like super young, I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist. I totally had a huge ocean phase. Although, to be fair, my entire life can basically be summed up as a series of phases that are all just different aspects and facets of design. Or at least it always ended up being the design and the architecture part of it that I kept kind of hyper focusing on. Nevertheless, during this phase, I just absolutely fell in love with the ocean. Once I started exploring the topics of water and design, that was really it for me. It was just like every single favorite holiday together, all wrapped up. I love both the possibilities because some of the ideas produced by think tanks are almost alien and out of this world. And other ideas, well, they just make me laugh, like super hard. Like Shark Week on a budget with only a green screen hard. It 100% may not be possible, and if it ever was, I'm not sure I wouldn't stop laughing hard enough to appreciate its beauty. One thing before we begin, if you suffer from thessallophobia, I would encourage you to give this episode a skip. I'm very serious, and I don't just throw out trigger warnings lightly. For anyone who maybe doesn't know it by the formal name, I mean those who suffer from the fear of the open, deep body of waters. You may want to skip this episode as well as the second half of this bonus episode that will be coming out on Saturday morning. Don't worry, I will have another fun episode coming out at the same time on Saturday, so you will have something still to listen to this week. So, before we discuss a few of the designs I want to talk about, let's discuss some of the advancements in ocean exploration and lay some of the foundations for the terminology we need to have a firm understanding of and to truly understand what the designs are targeting and why. So, as of June 2021, World Oceans Day, National Geographic has officially recognized there are 5 oceans: the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian, the Arctic, and the newest, the Southern, aka the Antarctic Ocean, which is super important as it is now changing maps and the information included on them. Now, obviously, this ocean did not spring forth out of nowhere. The history of the Southern Ocean is that it was originally just considered part of the others. While they, the academic and the research of the world, that big vague they, acknowledged the existence of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, or the ACC, there has been a rather intense debate on whether or not there was enough distinction from the rest of the oceans to be its own separate entity. So right now, the International Hydrographic Organization, or the ICO, doesn't recognize it according to the report from National Geographic. To put the IHO in perspective, you cannot be a landlocked state/country and be a member. So these is a group of very serious individuals who are focused on people who are affected by the ocean. As landscape architects in particular, we focus a lot on the hydrology, and we spend a lot of time in ArcGIS and with surveyors going over where the hydrology lines are, even if we just want to put in a parking lot. From personal research and experience with the topic, I know that the idea of the Southern Ocean's existence has been proposed multiple times in multiple reports starting around the early 2000s to the IHO. And from that initial report, I know that there have been several variations. To be honest with you, I've kind of lost track of the different addendums. I'm currently not sure how many different variations there are, but from my understanding, not everyone is convinced that there is a large enough, or that there is a large enough difference to justify the necessity of creating another individual ocean. And that's basically what's causing them to not recognize their existence. And of course, there's always the group of people who firmly believe that just because they are connected, there's actually only one, like as in a single world ocean. And the currents, instead of defining the individual oceans, are functioning together in a larger system and should not be considered as separate. One comment that I'm going to add, which is admittedly kind of a neutral controversial point, is that this is not the first time in history an organization has refused to acknowledge something exists while another organization has. And it feels like this is a good time to point out that just because an organization or a person fails to acknowledge something doesn't negate its existence. In a rather extreme example, Christopher Columbus thought he was in India the whole time he was here in America. And it wasn't until America Vespucci that anyone realized and acknowledged anything different. But as it was also established this year, not only did Columbus, problematic person he may have been, not be the first Westerner to land in America, but failing to acknowledge that fact didn't change the fact that the Vikings were in America long before that. And the Bering Strait brought people way over before any of the Vikings. There are also strains of potatoes and other produce in South America that prove that travel across the Pacific Ocean and cross-cultural exchanges occurred sometime in between the land bridge and the Vikings. And to clarify, I'm referring to proof that the people wouldn't have traveled over the land bridge and down, but directly traveled across the ocean. My favorite two things are truth and perspective. I love to challenge and change my perspective, and I love that the truth doesn't need your validation to maintain its existence. Now, weird rant aside, unlike seas, which are normally at least partially landlocked, oceans are considered through the vastness and the open spaces, which is kind of what compounded the classification. The Southern Ocean is basically defined as being from Antarctica to the 60th degree. That's basically moving north. So basically, take a globe, turn it so that Antarctica is facing up towards you. You'll notice the longitude and the latitude marks. So the Southern Ocean, which now includes the Ross Sea, which is touching the ice shelf closest to Australia and New Zealand, and the Weddell Sea, which is around the ice shelf that is closest to the Americas. When I was in geography as a kid, and you had to label it, on a blank map, I remembered it as the Weddell Sea's ice shelf was spread out, with the W's and the S's underlined. So right next to the sea, there's a long line along the coast that was also denoted as an ice shelf, while the Ross Sea had a thicker and deeper ice shelf on the map. Just as a quick trick for those in geography. I noticed on some of the maps they included an area by the Gerlach Strait, the Drake's Passage, and the Scotia Sea area, where the Atlantic Ocean is actually dipping into the 60th degree. For those who are curious, the importance of that particular degree is that it is also where the Antarctic Treaty region ends. So, in addition to oceans, some buzzwords you need to dredge up in your memory of the third grade World Geo class is trench, trough, seamount, and rise. Now, the great thing about all those terms is that all of them are the exact same landforms above water as below. So, trench is still a deep depression, regardless of whether or not water is present. A seamount may confuse you, but it is literally just an underwater mountain. So throw away the seed part and you have a mountain. Okay? But what is so important and is unique is currents. And in the case of the Southern Sea, that current I mentioned before is responsible for bringing nutrients, etc. According to Google, a current is a body of water or air moving in a definite direction especially through a surrounding body of water or air in which there is less movement. And that is a direct quote from Google, not my own words. Now, in long past days, the discovery and mapping of currents allowed for better travel times. Moving too far away from the currents and wind patterns, any boats that relied on sails and masts, like galleons, would often be trapped in dead in the water. Now, I'm not referring to, quote, dead water, which is the phenomenon documented in 1893 by the Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen. The difference between the two terms is that dead water is hyphenated and describes when the boat is stopped due to the water conditions. Oftentimes, this might be a pocket of fresh water and a bunch of salt water, or vice versa. It is stuck. Once it hits it, it's basically dead water. You can't move. There basically just has to be two conflicting types of water, which is what creates that pocket that gets your boat stuck. The other term is like being stuck on the side of the road. You can see the water and the cars rushing by you, but with your, quote, vehicle or boat too far off the shoulder, you really can't drive. Undoubtedly, you've probably heard a multitude of horror stories and ghost tales of ships like this. When I was a kid, I used to live around an area where I came into contact with a lot of sailors, whether by profession or preference. So my teachers would tell us stories of sea-going vessels that would either get stuck or ones like the SS Beijing, Octavian, and the Flying Dutchman, where they were abandoned, caught by the currents, and they continued to drift. Now, obviously, in the Flying Dutchman's case at least, that was a completely different story, and depending upon where you heard the original tale, it would dramatically change. One of the many versions I was told, it was that the ship got stuck, tragic something occurred, and the deal was struck. The Flying Dutchman's ship is, of course, Davy Jones' ship. Or ghost ship. And I feel like after the movie remakes, people are a lot more familiar with the Mary Celeste and the Philadelphia Experiment than the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which you may have heard of as the Albatross. Now, everyone wants to save the turtles, and you've probably heard of a multitude of people talking about the dangers of plastic straws and the need to recycle, which is true, but I want to make sure that someone somewhere in your life has actually bothered to tell you why you need to care. where basically I'm just going to spit out a ton of facts. By the year 2050, there will be more plastic weight than fish. Like, you just need to let that sink in for a moment. There will be more plastic weight than fish. You've probably heard about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is actually one of 5 floating islands of debris and garbage. Currently, it is twice the size of Texas. I used to regularly drive 5 to 6 hour long, trips, which is actually pretty short in America. I would often do this trip for weekends. So, like 10 to 12 hours round trip, depending upon traffic. It takes over that time if you didn't stop at all and sped the whole way to cross Texas once from the furthest 2 points away. To say that we really misunderstand the vastness of the ocean and the amount of damage we have done is an incredible understatement. Right now, more than 80% of the ocean is completely unknown to us. Sure, we name parts of it. We talk about it during movies. We include references like in the Michael Bay Transformers, where Megatron is dumped into the Laurentian Abyss, or the Mariana Abyss, which is the deepest one in the world. And according to a sci-fi movie I watched one night, the secret home of the Megalodons. So needless to say, one of the primary focus of revolutionizing exploration has not just been in submarines and diving equipment, but also in AUVs and ROVs. So let's go ahead and define them. So AUVs are autonomous underwater vehicles, while ROVs are remotely operated vehicles. As you probably guessed from the name, AUVs can be programmed and let go, while ROVs are often attached to either the controls directly or the ship and then the controls. ROVs require active participation with an operator, and the major limitation is the amount of cable. By that, I mean like the stretch or the length of it. AUVs require basically a lot of trust, to be completely frank with you. Many times when both are being used, it's because it is either too deep, not safe enough for humans to reach, whether due to a temporary or a permanent condition of the environment. AUVs are great for surveying, but the data can oftentimes only be accessed after their machine is collected. So if the conditions become so bad you lose the machine, then the whole mission has to be scrapped. Now, many of you will probably be asking yourselves right now, okay, Hollywood, we put a robot on Mars and still communicated with it, and you're telling me you can't always retrieve info from a machine in the ocean? Well, yeah, because unfortunately, money is still an issue, and not everyone has the funds necessary or access to the technology to do that. There's also been a lot of other issues. There's radiation, animal and sea life, creatures that use echolocation that factor in. And if I sat here and spoke about the entire history of sea exploration and mapping, starting with the HMS Challenger expedition, which took place from like 1872 to 1876, the one that was first credited with the modern field of sea mapping, I would be here for hours. Especially once I got started on the people of the sea mystery alone, much less how I think that the HMS Challenger as a starting point really fails to capture a lot of the background history and study that was really important to non-Western society seafaring. On the blog, I have included 2 articles for ROVs and AUVs. And more importantly, if you read them, they are super short, but you should really check out the reference list included in each of the articles. One article by Evander and Hawks talks about the, quote, marine renewable sector, and mentions how the whole category can be summed up in 3 topics that I'm going to read directly from the paper. So they are offshore wind tunnels, 2 marine hydrokinetic or MHK devices, and 3 offshore terminal energy converters, which are OTECs. So OTECs actually occur at the seawall, which is going to be around 1,000-meter mark, whereas the offshore wind turbines and the MHKs normally occur much closer inland. Now, as a field, we designers have been slowly moving in the direction of renewable sectors as a whole, both due in part to social pressures and interest, as well as the realization of the finite amount of resources available. So while many look to the stars to start meeting demand, some have started to move their focus a lot closer to home and begun to focus on pretty much unknown oceans right next to us. Now, I have no doubt that if any of you could name a firm that is working on erosion control, and the most commonly taught projects in schools, or at least my school, is often the Seattle seawall and the work of the firm Scape, etc. And I absolutely love those projects. Please sign me up. But there are also projects that are working on rebuilding and redesigning underwater tourism, coral reefs, and project designs. But I'm afraid you guys are going to have to wait until part 2 comes out this Saturday at 5 a.m. my time to learn all about those. As due to the length I rambled on, I've decided to break up this episode into 2 parts. One thing I'm going to do that I usually don't is I'm going to go ahead and post all of the sources on the blog tomorrow afternoon together as they stand for both episodes. Now, normally I separate them out. However, I will just continue to update them on both posts as I genuinely feel having the information all together is more important. And while I may have separated the topic into 2 not just because of the length, but also because I feel the best way to handle this topic is to give yourself a few days to think through it and digest the information. But thank you for tuning in. Once again, a big thank you to all my listeners, and a quick call to action. Please rate and review, share with your friends, your neighbors, your family, your professor, whomever you think needs some architecture in their life. We again have a Facebook page and private group, both of which are under the same name, Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. The answer to the question, who's the hostess, is Hollywood, just like the city. And the second question is just your opinion, and I might just use it as a recommendation for a show with a little shout out. And if you want to either be featured or have a case study suggestion, or perhaps just want to share a story of your favorite designer experience, you can either find me at Architecture, Coffee, and Ink. The website is architectureinc.design.blog, and the Insta is now Architecture, Coffee, and Ink, just like the email address. Everything will be linked in the show notes. You can also email me at architecturecoffeeandink@gmail.com, all spelled out without the ampersands or commas. But as always, may your coffee mugs be full and your inkwells never run dry.